Okay. Hi everyone, welcome back from the break. We'll give everyone just a second to get situated again. But like I said earlier, we really wanted um, to make sure that everyone is leaving the conference with something that they can do, right? Because a lot of times in conferences or spaces, we get like, a bunch of like really good knowledge and information in 4 days, and then we kind of leave and we don't know how to process it and we don't know how to put it into action. And so we wanted to make sure that our closing session helped you all do that. And we are very lucky that PAC's very own executive director is going to be leading us in this conversation and really helping us figure out how to put everything we learned into action. And so I'm going to do your formal introduction, Rania. You all have seen her throughout the 4 days, but just to formally introduce her, can you go to the slides with your bio just so I have it up? If you have it. Okay, well, I'm just going to say a personal bio. Rania is the founding and still current executive director of PAC New Jersey. So again, we're the Palestinian American Community Center. Rania works tirelessly as a community activist and an advocate for not just Palestine, but really for the local Palestinian community in Jersey and in the diaspora. She's someone who inspires many of us, including myself, constantly. She is a mother, a daughter, a wife, and a community activist, and somehow does it all. So it's my pleasure to be handing off the mic to Rania.
Thank you so much, Abir. My daughter will be making an appearance, even though we had a talk before. I want this session to be very interactive, but before we get started, I want to thank one of our sponsors for the conference, the Sunnyside Title. Sunnyside Title Company of New Jersey is a fully licensed New Jersey title insurance and settlement agent dedicated to providing professional title and title services to attorneys, lenders, and real estate professionals. We are a full service title company committed to excellence in both residential and commercial property transactions. So definitely check out Sunnyside Title for your title needs. With that being said, so today we're going to start off with a discussion about what is Freedom is the Future. We work very closely with Adalah Justice Project, and they put together a very beautiful list of what are our demands for Freedom is the Future. So I'm going to be quickly going over that with all of you today. And then we're going to be hearing from Jenna Hamda, who's one of the students in our program. And then we're going to be transitioning to a conversation, which is the way that we're hoping to get the thoughts rolling in terms of what do we have to do to get this idea of freedom for all, and also to hear you all and to kind of close this conference on a positive and uplifting note. So first off, in regards to the list of Freedom is the Future, this list was compiled by Adalah Justice Project, and I always like to say that one of the things that I always admired about Adalah Justice Project is one of the things that they did. They actually went to a group of Palestinians living in Palestine and asked them to like, what should we be doing as Palestinian Americans living in the diaspora? What should we be doing? And what are things that how can we continue to advocate for the Palestinian struggle? And their response was, we can't tell you, you're Palestinian, you're living in America, you know what to do best. And so based on those many conversations, they came up with a list of demands, which we're going to be discussing today. And the idea is, and I think this is why it's a great idea to end this conference, which is imagining a world with justice for all, which is really like the theme of our conference and the theme of a lot of the work we do at PAC. I want to just add with justice and freedom for all. So the first demand is the idea of see us, hear us. And what does that mean? Justice requires Palestinian self-determination. So the first demand is our right to self-determination. We have the right to dream, to make choices, to shape our lives and futures. We must be free to govern ourselves without interference. We have the right to preserve and express our language, culture, heritage, and peoplehood. We have the right to our land and natural resources. We speak for ourselves and must be consulted and listened to regarding our future. Nothing about us should be without us. which I think is a very prevalent theme that we've heard throughout the conference, uplifting the Palestinian voices, making sure that Palestinians are part of the conversations that govern our lives. And I think up until this point, many times conversations about Palestinians have been everything except with and about Palestinians. So I think that's where this is important, and this is where we will see freedom for Palestinians and for everyone. The second list of demands is return is the future. So justice requires our right of return. So we demand the fulfillment of the right of all Palestinians to return to their homeland. Like all people, Palestinians should have the freedom to stay, the freedom to move, and the freedom to return to their homes. We demand the right for all Palestinians to travel freely to Palestine with no interrogations, deportations, racial or religious profiling, or militarized borders. Return is the first step towards realizing historic justice and decolonizing our lands. And I think that's what's an important part of what we have to think about. Anyone who has been to Palestine knows the amount of restriction on movement that definitely interferes into the daily lives of all Palestinians. Even Palestinians living in the diaspora, there's difficulty getting into Palestine. Like myself, like I have a Hawiyya, it's very difficult for me to get into Palestine in the first place. So there's a lot of different restriction of movement. And on top of all of that, there's many Palestinians that were kicked out of their homeland in the first place. So this idea of right of return, where these Palestinians from all over the world can return to their ancestral homes, and we can see a free Palestine. The other one, the other list of demand is let's get free. So justice requires freedom for all Palestinians. So we demand freedom for all Palestinians. Israel cannot continue to control our lands and our lives. Israel must end its illegal military occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. It must end its blockade against Palestinians in Gaza who are deprived of water, electricity, and medical treatment. We demand the end of home demolitions, land confiscations, and racialized violence against Palestinian citizens of Israel. We, the indigenous people of Palestine, are entitled to full freedom on our land. And I think when you look at it, you're thinking, like, whenever I read this slide and think about this specific demand, I think, shouldn't we all have that right? You know, this is something that is not beyond the imagination or like a ridiculous demand. This is very much an integral part to anybody living and breathing and wanting to succeed and live a fulfilling life. So this definitely is this idea of let's redeem those very necessary and important qualities in our lives in order to see a free Palestine. And safety for all is the next list of the demands. And safety for all, justice requires the freedom to thrive. So like we just said, we're kind of establishing the base with the last demand, where we just want the basics for people to live and prosperity and prosper. And this one is, we demand the freedom to thrive and live in safety and dignity. We demand an end to Israel's structural violence and systemic destruction of Palestinian lives and livelihoods. We cannot thrive with a boot on our necks. We do not want handouts. We want the freedom to build our own just and liberated society that is free of classism, patriarchy, homophobia, racism, ableism, and bigotry in all forms. Without stability, safety, and agency, Palestinians cannot live full lives. And I think that's where we're taking the basics of living as human beings on this earth and elevating it. So we don't only want to live, we want to prosper. And this is this idea where we want to create, or to reclaim, because this was before the occupation, this was the reality of many Palestinians. So we want to reclaim this safety and this society where we can prosper. And I believe this is the last one. So struggle with us is the last one. So justice requires our right to resist for a better world. We demand the right to resist our oppression. We demand the right to live without fear of political repression when exercising our right to assembly, dissent, and speech. We demand an end to unconstitutional legislation denying our right to boycott for human rights. We should be free to organize our communities in pursuit of justice and liberation. And I think this is very important, and solidarity is a huge, huge component to this. And I think we've heard that throughout the conference. So thinking and reimagining and understanding what does solidarity mean and how does it look like in the context of pursuing freedom for Palestinians and for all oppressed people. So it's thinking back to this and understanding, our right. Again, this is a basic human right as well, to demand and demand our freedom, and demand the dismissal of any oppression, and replacing it with flourishing, prosperous communities. So I want you all to kind of keep these lists of demands. I revisit this list very regularly. We actually have a class called Freedom is the Future that was inspired by this list. And this last month, we offered it for the third time, and it was a very rewarding experience. And I want you all to be thinking about this as we begin to discuss our closing remarks, and take away the main ideas from this conference and figure out how we are all going to move forward from this point. So before I move further, I want to introduce a special young lady who is joining us. Jenna Hamda is one of our very active volunteers. I've known Jenna for many, many years now, and she kind of grew up at PAC, and we're very happy and proud to see the young lady that she's becoming. She was one of our students in our Holding Onto Palestinian Existence course, which is similar to our Freedom is the Future course, but kind of is targeted towards a younger age. So HOPE, for short, is for our high school students. We went through a very great virtual course where we had students actually tuning in from all across the country, and they were learning about Palestine, the history, what does social justice mean, and what can they do with all this. And Jenna was one of our star students, as always, and she put together a very beautiful presentation, kind of summarizing her experience, what she learned. And we thought it would be a really great way to kind of jumpstart us into this discussion of what does freedom for the future look like. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Jenna.
Thank you, Rania, for giving me this opportunity to speak. Hope has impacted me a lot, and growing up in a Palestinian home, I was always aware of what was going on in Palestine, but I never knew the background of it until I joined Hope class. So at the end of our class, we were told to do a project on what we learned from Hope. So this is what I learned. This is my presentation. So it's called Holding Onto Palestinian Existence. So I knew a lot of stuff about Palestine before Hope class. I knew the symbolism of the olive tree, which represented resistance and resilience, which is the theme of this conference, because I knew that olive trees are drought resistant and they can grow under poor soil conditions. And this can relate to Palestinians because even under poor soil conditions or poor conditions in Palestine, we're still attached to Palestine and our land no matter what. I knew a lot about the culture and the food and traditions, but I never knew the history behind it until Hope. I was aware of the 1948 Nakba, which was the destruction of the Palestinian homeland and the displacement of the citizens. And I was aware of hunger strikes through social media because I know that a lot of Palestinian prisoners fast as an act of protesting for their freedom. So I learned a lot about the Palestinian struggle from Hope, but a couple of things that stuck out to me the most was ethnic cleansing, which was one of the reasons why I joined this class, because I know last year around this time there was a lot of ethnic cleansing going on in Palestine, and I wanted to learn more about it and why the Israelis were ethnically cleansing Palestinians from their homes. So I learned that Israelis took over more than 600 cities in Palestine, which caused many citizens to lose their home and move places around the world, such as South America and other parts of the Middle East. And my family can relate to this because we are from a beled called Al-Lid, which was now Tel Aviv Airport. And a lot of my great-grandparents, they worked in Tel Aviv Airport. So they were kicked out during the Nakba, and we had to move to a different city called Turmus Hayya. So my family can definitely relate to ethnic cleansing because we were displaced from our original hometown. I also learned about the Intifada, which means shaking off, and it was a series of protests and riots in Palestine against the Israeli occupations. I learned that there were two. And I learned about the apartheid wall, and I never knew that this was a thing. It's a 70-kilometer concrete wall built in urban areas such as Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and this wall cut off access to many jobs and daily activities of the Palestinian citizens. I found this very upsetting because it caused many Palestinians to lose contact with people from other towns in Palestine, and it cut off access to people's jobs. And many of where they usually go every day. So I found that very upsetting. And I also learned about the history of Debka and the history of Azefa. And Azefa is a chant usually that goes on in the beginning of weddings. But I found out through Hope that the elderly Palestinian woman would chant and sing songs near the prison that would give the prisoners, which would usually be like their sons or grandsons or nephews, a code to escape. So I found that very interesting. I never knew that that was the history of Azefa, and they used it to help their sons escape prison. What impacted me from Hope class the most was the depth in the background of the occupation in Palestine. This course was definitely an eye opener, which led me to ask older generations in my family about my roots and where I came from. And I had a lot of questions to ask them because this class it helped me, like, I wanted to know more about my background because I was born and raised in America, so I wasn't familiar about my Palestinian roots. And Hope has impacted me to advocate for a free Palestine, which I'm going to get more into in the next slide. So my plan on advocating for Palestine is protesting for Palestinian rights. I think protesting is probably the number one way to have the rights for Palestinians. And when you protest, it brings other people to question, why are these people protesting? Like, for example, let's say you're protesting in Patterson and non-Palestinian people in Patterson are asking why are they protesting, and it brings to my next way, which is educating others on what I learned through Hope. I think educating people is really important because it makes them want to advocate for Palestine even more through what they learned. And another way of advocating for a free Palestine is speaking about Palestine through social media platforms. Most of the things that I learned about Palestine is through social media. Whenever there's a problem going on, I do find about it. I found out about it through social media. So I think social media is a great way to bring awareness about what is going on in Palestine. Being patient and being persuasive is a very important way on advocating that nobody really touches upon. When there's a saying that says good things come to those who wait. So if you're being patient, it gives you a chance for a better outcome. As a constant volunteer of PAC, I feel like I'm advocating for Palestine through volunteering because it brings me closer to Palestine, and I work with a bunch of other Palestinian people to raise awareness, and it's a good way of keeping the Palestinian community together through PAC. So I find that volunteering is really important. And keeping a positive attitude is also important because it also brings back to being patient and persuasive. When you're positive and optimistic and patient, a good outcome will happen. Raising awareness and donations is really important because when I went to Palestine in 2018 for the first time, it was a huge eye opener because it wasn't what I saw through social media. It was more a first person point of view. And I saw that there were many Palestinian citizens, especially children, who were very unfortunate, and they really do need help. So donating is really important. And visiting Palestine, as I said before, it's a really good way on advocating because when you're there and you truly see like what's going on, like face to face, it makes you want to help them out even more, which is a good way on advocating for Palestine. If I can teach the world one thing about Palestine, it would be what the media doesn't portray, which consists of the true struggle and background of the Palestinian people. And I would also teach about the culture and the traditions of Palestine. Social media definitely does not show the true background of what is going on in Palestine. It shows maybe it's a very watered down version of what's going on, and they make it seem more like a two-state thing, which isn't what's going on in Palestine. So I think I would teach people what the media does not portray, which is what I learned in Hope. And when I think of Palestine, there are many words that come to mind, but the most important words that come is strength, because Palestinian people have a very strong and close connection to their land, which causes them to be determined and advocate for their freedom. I think Palestinian people are definitely one of the most strongest people because of they've been through many struggles. And every house in Palestine has a different characteristic to it. I learned when I went to Palestine, it had a lot of character to it. whether it was the color, shape, or size, but mainly it was the story behind each house and how every family came together. And the Israeli settlement definitely all looks the same, and there's no character to it. And another word that I think of is solidarity. Palestine is one big community who all work together for peace, equality, and justice. I think PAC is a great way of bringing the Palestinian community together. And through PAC, I met many Palestinian people. I met some of my best friends through PAC. And it definitely helps, especially the younger generation, to advocate for a free Palestine. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Sorry, I was figuring out how to unmute. Thank you very much, Jenna. I hope you are all beaming with pride as much as I am. I think, Jenna kind of summarized our experience throughout this class and all the many lessons that, the different students had learned. And we definitely encourage you all to check out these two classes that we have, whether it be Hope or Freedom is the Future, depending on your age. They are completely virtual. And so anyone from anywhere can sign up. So thank you so much, Jenna. And we hope that this kind of, spirit jumpstarts us into this conversation, which if you can see on the slide, I kind of summarized the main concepts throughout the conference that we had into these 5 points, which is the importance of oral history and different aspects of solidarity. I think we had 2 different panels that focus on solidarity in different lens. This idea that was repeatedly said, even though we didn't have necessarily a session on it, but elevating and focusing and amplifying Palestinian voices. And then this idea and this concept that Palestinians are more than victims, which we were talking about, maybe this is going to be our theme for the next conference. But this idea of how do we tell this narrative, and how do we, amplify the life first before occupation, and then second, this idea of, okay, when we see a free Palestine, what are we going to return to? What are the different cultural things or different aspects of life that we have been able to preserve and uplift? And the last thing, which you all saw with our beautiful panel that we had last, which is turning beauty into power through art. Art is such a powerful way of resisting and uplifting that and understanding what does it mean and how does it look like. So to do that, I know we're a small group that is tuning in right now, but I've created a couple of breakout groups because I feel like sometimes people are more likely to speak when it's smaller groups. So I created breakout groups for each of the 5 areas, and you are free to choose whichever one you want. I'd like everybody to go in there, kind of discuss these different concepts. Specifically, I want you to focus on how do the following concepts or terms look like, why are they important, and what can we do to preserve it, or uplift it. And then I want everyone to focus on, in the end, how do these terms play a role in freedom for all, right? So how does this end up being the way that we end things? It's going to be a quick, I see some people dropping the call, it's going to be a quick breakout room. It's not going to be anything crazy. Share what you feel comfortable with, join the group that you feel comfortable with. If you don't feel comfortable joining a group, don't. We'll just do about, I want to say like 5 minutes of this just so that we can start the conversation, and then we'll go from there. So I am going to open the rooms right now. Okay, so the way you access it is if you go to the bottom panel, there's it says breakout rooms, you click on it and then you join the group that you would like to join. And if people really aren't feeling this, speak up now. It's going to be just a 5-minute way to spearhead this conversation. We can always, there we go. I see some people joining. You can always do this as a larger group. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you to those who went into the breakout groups. I know not all the breakout groups were populated. So I would like to start with the 2 that were populated, and then we can go into the other points of discussion. So the first, this idea of centering and elevating Palestinian voices. Would anyone from that group like to add or say anything?
Yeah, I will say a few words and then I'll let Hani Khouri talk. But we discovered that we have among us a Palestinian writer, somebody who wrote a book about Palestinian experience as somebody with a disability. Hani Khouri. Fahani, if you're still there, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. By the way, I'm very impressed by this. I'm so sorry I could not participate the entire conference, but just a few hours I spent with you today gives me a lot of hope. And Jenna, you give me a lot of hope. I think this presentation you gave to us was wonderful. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. The book that I wrote is Giving Up is Not an Option. Memoirs of a Palestinian American. That's the name, the title of the book. Giving Up is Not an Option. And I think that describes the story of many Palestinians, including those who are born with disabilities. I was born with a disability, and I lived under the Israeli occupation, the brutal Israeli occupation. And however, I have prevailed, and I decided to write my story. I'm currently a professor at Mercer University, and I wanted to share my story with as many Americans, with as many Palestinians, letting them know about the reality of the occupation and what it meant and what it means to live and grow up under an occupation. And I actually emailed the book last night, to Abir for her review, and many of you for you if you'd like to review it. But I would love to share it maybe in a conference or in an event, just to say to the world that 3% of the Palestinians who are disabled, who have disability, are also and do also have voices, and these voices need to be heard and amplified.
Thank you so much. I actually shared the link to the book in the chat. We definitely would be very interested in hosting potentially a Palestine Monday with you to kind of explore the book further and these very important themes that you're highlighting. So thank you so much.
I'll be happy to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for joining us. So I think that's a great example of centering and elevating Palestinian voices, and that's something that's very integral to our work at PAC. I remember when we first started PAC back in 2014, the Palestinian conversations were anything but centering the Palestinian voices. It was as if being talked to or about by everyone, and like kind of like an exhibit in a way, like, oh, this is how Palestinians feel and this is how they are. And in the last 8 years, we've definitely seen a transformation of how people have been elevating those voices and sharing those voices, and we hope that it only continues for many years to come.
Yes.
So would anyone else like to share any reflections and thoughts? And even if you weren't part of that group, what are your thoughts about centering and elevating Palestinian voices, and what can we do further, whether it be PAC or beyond? What are different things that we can do to continue elevating Palestinian voices?
If I might add something about this, I believe that if we really manage to succeed in this topic, we will find that, like Dr. Baroudi said, that there is so much Palestinian talent and there's so much powerful Palestinian voices out there, but they have not been amplified, or nobody knows about them. They might be influential in their little circles, but the rest of us in the United States don't know about them, or in the rest of the world don't know about them. So I believe we have like a lot of treasure, and I think if we keep focusing on this topic, we will discover that we have an oil reserve that can give life to the Palestinian cause and can help us speed the change that we're all looking for in the United States, because these voices have a lot to offer, but they don't have the platform and they don't have the mic to be heard. And I think if we succeed in that, we could really see great progress and great change in a short period of time.
Yes, absolutely agreed. And I want to invite everybody I know PAC is located in Clifton, New Jersey, but we do try to uplift and elevate the voices of Palestinians across the country and across the world. Through many series, like we have a Palestine Monday series, we also have a Sunday series, and both of those virtual online series focus on really giving a platform to many different Palestinians to share, whether their work or their areas of expertise. And it's actually been very rewarding for Abid and myself and the entire PAC team to kind of see all these different people that are emerging, all these different talents and books and poems and artworks. And I think that this is definitely the way to freedom as future for all. As Dr. Baroud actually said, and I personally resonated with that a lot, where he was saying that, you know, do not let the fact that you're telling a story or a personal experience diminish what you are sharing. It doesn't necessarily have to be 100% academic, because we're not always at that point. We have the leaders and scholars like Dr. Rashid Khalidi, who we definitely look up to, and we want more of Dr. Rashid Khalidi. But until we get to that point, let's elevate our stories. Let's share what's going on. And let's not diminish, whether it be internally or externally, the different experiences we have and the different narratives and things that we would like to share. And I think that definitely fits also into what Wafat Ghanem was saying in the last session, that we as Palestinians within our own communities need to work to create safe spaces, safe and brave spaces to uplift the voices of one another, where people can share what they have in mind and share their different passions and different means of getting, whether it be their artwork or their books or whatever it may be. And yes, I think a great way, thank you Lieli for sharing that. So one of the ways that we also do this is we have a quarterly magazine called Palestine, that we actually utilize it as our personal way of resisting occupation and resisting injustices across the world. Is we highlight different stories of injustices across the world through whether it be poetry, pictures, art, drawings, paintings. And through that, we're able to create a beautiful magazine 3 to 4 times a year. And we share it with you all, and we definitely encourage you all to check it out and also become contributors for it. Whether that be a short story, a reflection, a nonfiction piece, whatever it may be, we would love to hear from you all. So would anyone else like to make any closing comments about this specific point? Okay, well, thank you all. And I think the way I want to kind of close this, and I think Jenna really helped launch us into this discussion, is that one of the very popular myths is that the old will die and the young will forget. And I think by elevating Palestinian voices, by sharing the stories of Palestinians across the diaspora, by giving the youth and the young the opportunity to share, we will actively every day be dismissing and dismantling this myth until we do see a free Palestine. So with that, I want to go to the second popular discussion point, which is turning beauty into power through art. So if anyone from that group would like to share, please feel free to unmute or put something in the chat.
I was part of this group. I could just jump in and give a quick example of just how I kind of turn my experiences as a Palestinian living in diaspora, living in America, into, like, I write poetry, and like to me that's like beauty into power through art. And just, to me, yeah, just like a beautiful experience, and it just feels powerful. So for me, just writing poetry.
Thank you, Jinan. And I know we've personally had a lot of different conversations about that, like how does that look like, and what are different ways that we can amplify those voices, whether that be through open mic nights, through different platforms, different workshops like resistance rating. So I think all of that is kind of going back to Christian Davis Bailey's point, where saying that, you don't need necessarily a starting point. Just start working, you know, and see what kind of comes through that. And everybody has a talent, whether it be very evident or still hidden beneath. And it's our job to kind of work internally and as a community to discover and highlight those different talents and voices. So would anyone else like to add to that point from Jinan's group? Or not from Jinan's group, if anyone has any thoughts or reflections, especially after the last session, anything that's, you know, comes to mind.
I really appreciated the last remarks about like how we can empower artists like internally. I think that's really important. I don't think we do that often. Like even just thinking about like, you know, when you're a kid and you're trying to figure out like what you want to do in your life and someone's really into art, the first thing is like, well, no, that's not a career, right? Like that's, you can't fully focus on that, and that's something on the side. And if there's ways like, you know, like Wafa's saying, like making them actual jobs like that we offer to youth to encourage them to use these talents into something that has, you know, because I feel like when you say like, no, that's something on the side, then you're taking away part of their like passion for Palestine, because they feel like that also has to be put on the side. And like I'm not an artist, but like I've always been interested in activism. That's something that I've gotten a lot, right? Like that can't be your full-time job. You can do that on the side. I'm stubborn and didn't listen, so I made it my full-time job somehow, but a lot of people aren't able to, right? And so I think that's just something that I'm thinking about, and that I know we've had a lot of conversations about, but like, how do we encourage and make a passion for liberation and freedom and your community and your culture something that isn't seen as something on the side, but really like what we do with our lives and our career.
And I think that's a very important point. And I think as a community, we need to challenge ourselves to kind of think beyond the box. As a, you know, a predominantly immigrant community, I think the constant, like, in order to succeed and be successful in life, you need to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, and anything other than that is not worth being. I think that narrative needs to be challenged, because if we think back to historically, we were strongest when all of the fields, especially the arts, were you know, channeled, and we were empowered in those different ways. We were at one point creating the best music, the best art, and that's the best, every different depiction of art. And I think that's when we reclaim that and we realize that this is really where we need to be headed, and this is where we need to focus. Yes, having doctors, engineers, and lawyers are very important, but that can't be where we put all of our focus into, or the only thing we see value in. Because in the end of the day, there's other jobs that need to be done. And if we're not in those jobs, other people will be doing those jobs, and other people will be giving those voices. And so it's figuring out how to put ourselves in those positions. And as a community, being more empowering and forgiving and allowing and creating these spaces where we can empower different places of growth. I think that's really important. And I think, you know, back to the conversation with Rania and Khadija, that's exactly it. Like I remember in the chat, I was reading the comments of, well, we need more Arab American therapists. Unfortunately, I'm like, especially in our community, there's a shortage of them. And it's because, why? You're gonna waste your time being a therapist? Why don't you find another job? Why don't you find something more rewarding? But then we realize, okay, if you're doing all these other fields, but you're forgetting about therapy, what's happening? You know, you're creating a society and world that, yeah, we are successful in maybe the monetary sense, but you're missing a lot of the other components of a successful community, where you have the mental health and mental well-being, and growth, mental growth as a community. So would anyone like to comment on anything else about this idea of turning beauty into power through art?
I think I want to say something. I have in my house 2 pieces that my mother did at Tatriz. I'm sure all of we've heard about Tatriz, right? So, you know, when I feel down, and I think all of us at some point, we feel down, and I want to elevate my soul and my spirit, I look at these 2 pieces. And I want to remind myself, and I ask myself, how many stitches are there? this is an incredible amount of determination. My mom is bedridden. She's 93 years old now. She doesn't do any, she doesn't do any more work of this type. But really, when we look at the art, and we see a huge, incredible amount of determination in that art. And we need to see the world through the eyes of that determination that turns, this incredible, I look at it, like a picture, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, and I just look at this. It took her sometimes, one piece takes her, 10 months, couple of years, depends how large the piece is. But it is really the helm of human determination to be able to turn art into reality. And it is really, indeed, it is a source of power, without a question. It is a source of power, and it elevates the self and the spirit and the soul. So I think that the art, and I think the Palestinian art in general, is an expression of the love for life. It's an expression of resistance, an expression of determination. It is the expression of many, many aspects of what living and life ought to be.
Thank you so much for sharing, and God bless your mother. May she have a long, healthy life ahead of her. But I think that's a very important point. I remember a couple of years ago with the Homeland Project is actually the first time that I really stepped foot into a refugee camp. And one of the most moving experiences for me was seeing the artwork that was depicted on the walls that kids and youth and adults in the refugee camp were drawing on these walls. And the images were so powerful. As a privileged Palestinian American, I was walking through the refugee camps, taking pictures and like really soaking it all in. But all I could think about is exactly that, the moment of all the emotions that it really brings out, that brings out from within you, and all these different thoughts that happen, and this idea of wanting to create change. And sometimes it goes back to what, again, Christian Davis Bailey was saying earlier, that that's your avenue. That's how you release. And it was so beautiful. And I remember one of the trips that we went through an art gallery and a photo gallery of one of the people living in the refugee camp, and the images that were drawn and brought out was so powerful and so beautiful that you just want to give it like a worldwide stage so everybody else can see and feel this as well. And I think building on that point, Jinan very beautifully mentioned it in her last, and while moderating the last session, that some things that she kind of came out with, and even the picture she had as her background was from her trips to Palestine. And that's something I think actually will bring us closer to freedom, is challenging everybody to visit Palestine. And not only to visit Palestine, and that's actually one of our components for Homeland Project, is you visit Palestine, but then you come back and figure out to share. How am I going to share my experiences? And I think that's the question that we all have to ask ourselves. We all have talents. We all have different things that we bring to the table, and we have to figure out how can we personally amplify the stories and experiences that you have while visiting Palestine as Palestinian Americans or whatever it may be, and figuring that out, whether that be through photography, whether that be through artwork, whether that be through sharing a lecture or sharing an experience or doing an interactive experience. And I think really drawing on these very powerful experiences that we go through in order to facilitate, and to shout out Jinan, actually, when she went through the Homeland Project, she put together a very beautiful book that was like a photojournalism kind of her experience. And, she gave one to PAC, and she gave one, I think, to her workplace, and one to her local library. And that's leaving her impact on, on her experience, and sharing her, her view of what had happened and what was going on. So I think just continuing in this idea of really finding what resonates with you and sharing it with the world. So with that, are there any other closing remarks about this point before we go to the next points? Thank you, Leah. So I think the next point I want to get into is oral history. This is a personal favorite topic of mine, because I think that Palestinian traditions, as many indigenous populations traditions, are so populated and so carried from generation to generation through oral history. And I want to also tie it into the conversation we're having about intergenerational trauma in a way of like kind of figuring out, again, because I think in order for us to see freedom in the future is first to preserve this oral history and keep it going from tradition, from generation to generation. But at the flip side, also figuring out a way to deal with and process and unpack this intergenerational trauma that exists in our communities, exists in our families, that we can and will address. So any thoughts on that? Any reflections? What does everyone think? How can we address these 2 points, or how have you addressed them on a personal level? Or even just some general thoughts. Like, does anyone have any just general thoughts? Like, is this the first time you heard of the concept of intergenerational trauma? Has anyone watched the movie Encanto and felt so, empowered by that? I know it's a movie about, I guess, I see that a movie, I believe was in Colombia, that's setting in Colombia, but, there's a lot of similarities with Hispanic and Arab, specifically Palestinian culture. So any ideas? And then again, this idea of oral history, what do you suggest? How can we preserve this oral history? How can we keep it going for generations to come? And what is the significance of it?
Rania, when you say what's the significance of oral history, I think the biggest, it's what hurts the Palestinians most is what's not spoken. So hearing things like ethnic cleansing, like hearing these terms out in the open, like, and people being made aware that there is an apartheid wall. Like, there are people that did not know it existed until, like, I showed them that book I made with the photo journal. Or even Jenna was saying she didn't know there was an apartheid wall until she took the class. So just being firm in, like, just knowing we know our facts, and rooted in the fact that we don't talk about a lot of the atrocities that happen there all the time, but it is ongoing all the time, and it's been a century. So oral history is just significant because we're missing out on what's not spoken, and we do have valid things to say, even if there are voices telling us that, or people telling us that we don't have a right to exist, because we are up against people who do think we shouldn't exist. So we need to be rooted in the fact that we have to preserve our oral history by giving our opinions, by doing things like Hani writing his book. I saw the cover art. It's actually really cool. I'm going to go to Barnes & Noble to get it later. But yeah, so just oral history is just really important. You have to speak up when you can and when you're certain about what you're saying.
Thank you, Jinan. I think that's so important. And again, Dr. Baroud referenced it in his talk where he was saying that we all have those stories, we all have those experiences. And like Layla's saying in the chat, we need to speak to our elders. One of the first assignments we actually have in our classes that we teach is go talk to your parents, go talk to your grandparents, ask them stories. And I think a lot of it, again, this is why I say it ties to this idea of intergenerational trauma, because some of our family members, whether they be our parents or grandparents, they've gone through the wars, they've gone through the occupation, they've gone through fearing, losing your family, like losing everything that you know. And sometimes we shy away from that. And I remember shouting at my dad in this conference. Like, I remember when I was younger, I'd also tell him, like, did you used to ask your dad this? And did you ask your dad that? And he's like, no, like, we grew up, like, we don't ask things, we just do, right? In many ways, again, it's a response to trauma where we're not challenged to ask things, and coming from an American privilege, we have that privilege of wanting to know more and having the ability to ask, like, where did, tell me the story of how this happened, or tell me, but it's also this concept of we need to unpack, right? So we need to unpack, and we need to understand and go through and recognize and put a name on it. Like, there was trauma that happened, whether you want to realize it or not. And I think a lot of times as Palestinians, a quick story, and I think this is related. I remember when I think I was about 10 years old. We had gone to Palestine for the summer, and we were caught in the middle of a skirmish, basically, between Palestinians and Israelis. And again, as a privileged American, I thought my life was going to end, and it was very, very scary. And I was terrified. Like, I was like making promises to God, like, please just get me out of this situation, and I will do whatever you want me to do. And I remember going home to my family in Palestine and telling them what was happening, and they were, smoking their cigarettes and drinking their coffee, for me, it was like one of the most traumatizing experiences that I still hold on to today in my adulthood. But for them, it was like, and like, what do you want? Like, okay, and what? And so what? And I think that in itself speaks in many things. Like, one, tell our stories, which for me, again, I came back as a Palestinian American, and I've told my story to many different people in my settings here in America. But it's this concept of, this is not normal. This shouldn't be normal, where the response of, and so what happened, and in really understanding that there's a chronic trauma that's happening to Palestinians that are living there. And then once you're able to immigrate out, or if you do immigrate out, that trauma doesn't leave you, right? It carries through you. And then the best part is, in this concept of intergenerational trauma, it transfers to your kids, and transfers to years to come. And I think, again, coming from a place of privilege, we have the opportunity to unpack that, fully unpack it, and understand where we're coming from, and why is this happening, and having those difficult conversations to understand all of that. So I think that this is really important, and something that I personally would like to see at one point is holding on to these oral history, holding on to the stories, and creating these archives and creating these videos. Because at the end of the day, all the history books in the world and all the Zionist activists in the world can come tell you the Nakba never happened. But when you have a story from your grandfather or great grandfather about how they were kicked out and exiled from their land, where they feared their siblings being dead, where they were separated into many different countries only to be reunited like many, many years later, no one can take that away from you, And I think that's how we can keep this going, is for many years to come, if these stories keep passing down from generation to generation, and we don't forget and continue to hold on and continue to share these stories, that's how we can uplift each other's voices, and that's how we can see freedom one day for everyone. So I went on a little rant, but would anyone else like to add anything?
I can connect with that and relate to it, because my mom was born in Jaffa, and I understood the Nakba through her eyes. I mean, I read about the Nakba. I understand the history of the Nakba, but to hear it from mom resonates. It's like it's been written on my mind forever until the very end. So it's a way to carry on the tradition. It's the way to carry on the struggle. It's a way to carry on the struggle. I mean, the fight for determination. It is the best way to really connect with the past through the eyes of those that we love the most, and through the eyes of those we trust, through the eyes of friends and family members. These deliberations resonate. They stick with us, and I think that the more we have them in our lives, the better we are in terms of not only understanding what really took place during the Nakba and after the Nakba, but it really cements our struggle for freedom, and it transcends it to future generations. We need to be able to be certain and make sure that the future generation understands the history as it was seen and lived by friends, relatives, and not only by historians.
Absolutely. I 100,000% agree. I think I could not have said it better. And just to tie in this idea again of like unpacking intergenerational trauma, I think in addition to tying into your identity, it also helps you understand your identity. Because I think a lot of times, again, growing up as Palestinian Americans or as any hyphenated individuals, a lot of times we don't fully understand where our parents are coming from. And there's maybe a lot of different issues that are happening. Like I remember there was an incident that I had when I was growing up, and like I really wanted to go get my hair done in a salon and like all this different stuff. My mom was so resistant against it, and I never understood why. And we got into so many different arguments. And in my head it was, oh, she's just being difficult and like not understanding. And then later, when I became an adult and we spoke and we unpacked about it, I found out she actually had a very traumatizing experience, or someone in her where she was living, she grew up in Jenin, one of her really close friends had a very traumatizing experience as a result of the Israeli occupation because of that. And so for me, that helped me understand things so much more. And I was like, okay, so it's not my mom being, closed-minded or whatever it is. There's a lot of trauma that was involved in this, and understanding how, even though I never had the privilege of living in Palestine, that's still affecting my life in many ways. And this seeing the trauma that carries down through generations through occupation, and then having those stories to tell later. Like when I tell the story of what happened to my mom's friend, it's like beyond belief. Like people are like, what, that really happened? Yes, that does happen. And again, this idea of no one can discredit that, right? If you've lived it, if you've gone through it, if a family member has or friend has, and then at the end of the day, there's this legitimacy to it that you can share and uplift in many different places.
It becomes the ultimate truth for us, yes.
Exactly, yeah. And I think, I know Abid and I have this conversation regularly, that the world of academics tries to always discredit that. But with the struggle of any Indigenous people, that is our struggle, because the world is trying to erase this oral history in any way that they can. And our job is to preserve it and keep it going from one generation to the next, and understand it, and challenge it in ways that make sense, and that ways that will help us better understand our identity and our connection with our families and our connection to the community as a whole. So before we transition to our next point, any other ideas about oral history, intergenerational trauma, how to maintain it, and how can we tie that to a freedom for everyone? Okay, so next we're gonna go into solidarity, and then we're gonna end with Palestinians are more than victims. I wanna end with that because hopefully this will carry us on into our fourth annual conference. So solidarity, so what does that look like? What have we learned in this conference, and how can we stand in solidarity with others and bring on more allies to the Palestinian struggle so that we could see freedom for Palestine and a freedom for all? And just to kick it off, I remember one time we brought a speaker to PAC, and he actually said the secret to just injustices in the world being solved is in the Palestinian struggle. And he was I forget his name, but he was Tunisian, and he was saying that in order for Palestine to be the struggle of Palestine being solved, we need to solve, in order for all of the injustices in the world to be solved, we need to focus and find the solution for Palestine. And it's that idea of standing with the Palestinians so that it's not only the Palestinians that win in the end, we all win in the end. And then just really quickly, I want to uplift a comment in the chat from Leila, where she was saying about the last point, maybe we should honor our elders in the community and have an oral history night of some kind. Honestly, that's my dream come true. I always say that the first thing that I wanted to work on when I started working with PAC was establishing an oral history night and kind of creating some sort of video archive. So anyone who wants to work on this or has any expertise on this, please let me know. I would love to work with you to make this happen, because I think this is a key in many ways. So back to our discussion on solidarity. What are people's thoughts?
I think that solidarity is very important. I feel that people that are going through the same experience or partially same experience of oppression or discrimination or social injustice need to feel each other's pain and need to be there for each other. That being said, I think that sometimes we tend to think that we tend like to try to compare and sometimes up or down the suffering of some group or others. And I don't think that's helpful. I think that we need to be there for the, let's say, people that in the United States that are facing social injustice. We need to be there for them. but I don't think we need to start comparing everything that happens with the Palestinians to their experience. I know there's similarities, and I know that that's a way for people to relate to what happens. Because if you live an experience, it's easier for you to relate, because it's like, I feel your pain, I've been there. But we need to be very careful when we do that, because there is some huge differences in some of the experiences. And I think sometimes we tend to overlook that. The second point on solidarity is that it has to be genuine. It cannot be fake. It cannot be one for one. You're there for me, so I'm there for you. It has to be genuine. I'm there for you, even if you're never going to be there for me. I'm there for you because I believe in your cause, and your cause is a just cause. I think we have to just pay more attention to these 2 points, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I think in the social media age, and especially after a lot that happened in 2020, there's a lot of like optics solidarity, where I'll share the post, or I'll stand with you in this specific way, or I'll be there for you if you're there for me. And that's actually not what solidarity is about. That's not what really being an ally is about. It's that I see your cause, I see the merits in your cause, I believe in the injustices in your cause, and that's why I'm going to stand there for you. And it's also this lack of transactional solidarity, where you're like, I'm only going to be there for you because you're going to be there for me. It's really understanding and unpacking the injustices that are happening to other groups that are being oppressed, and standing with them regardless of how it's going to benefit you in the end. And I think that's the key. And I think we're getting there as a community, but we have a lot of work to do. And I think in general, the way that we've viewed solidarity for many years is this idea of like, I will side with you because in the end of the day, it benefits me. But I think when we really will get to this idea of freedom for all is when we remove ourselves from the solidarity, and we just focus on the injustice, and we say, this is injustice in general. In order to eradicate injustice, we need to work with these various, different groups that are experiencing it, just to eradicate this idea of injustice, removing kind of yourself in the process. And I think the other point, and actually Dr. Ramzi Baroud, I loved his talk, so I'm gonna reference it a lot. He also brought that up, where he was saying that a lot of times the way that the Palestinian struggle is brought up is in the lens of a different struggle. And actually Noura Arikat, who we weren't able to bring to this conference, but maybe to one of our future conferences, she constantly says this, that we can't be taking, because you kind of take away from the other struggle where you're saying, oh, this is it, but this is how it's different. Each struggle has its own lens of how the injustice is happening and how everything's going on. And we need to appreciate and fully encompass ourselves in the understanding of each struggle on its own. We can find the similarities to bring, the likeliness, but at the end of the day, your anger for this injustice should be because of this injustice, and not because, it reminds you only of this, of an injustice you're personally going through. Does that make sense? There's a lot of thoughts I have with this, but thank you very much for uplifting that. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add?
And maybe just another point, for us as Palestinian community, that our work for Palestine is not a solidarity work. We are the Palestinians. Sometimes we tend to forget that. We think that the Palestinians inside Palestine, or the Palestinian diaspora, and our work is disconnected. It's actually one work. Maybe we live in different places on the earth, and we have different area that we work in, and that requires different tactics. But we are our work with our brothers and sisters, the Palestinians all over the world, should be a work of a work of unity, not a work of solidarity.
I really like that. I think that is, again, back to tying to this idea of how do we achieve freedom. I actually think that's exactly it. And I think as Palestinian Americans, being that we live in a world that kind of villainizes Palestine and villainizes our experiences, there's been this need to kind of say, to kind of justify it in different ways, and justify it and see it in different ways. But it's on us to kind of take ownership of our struggle, and realize that it is as important and as, the injustice here is not any less because it's happening to someone that's being villainized by the West. I think that's what's really important. And we have to kind of take ownership of this in terms of our own identities. And we see this every day at PAC. And I do want Abir to comment on this because this is kind of her bread and butter and a lot of the work that she does. But like we see that every day where we have this and historically, like before PAC, people were shying away from, like, they would side with every injustice. But when it comes to being Palestinian, it was something on the hush hush. But now it's building this confidence that, no, I'm Palestinian and I deserve freedom and I deserve liberation and I deserve this as much as anybody else does. And so I think that's a lot of the internal work we have to do as a community to build that confidence so that we can then elevate our struggle to be equivalent and equally as important as any other justice, pursuit against any injustice. And Abir, if you want to weigh in.
I don't really have anything to add. I think you both have said it. I think it's the same concept of like I really appreciate the focus on solidarity as relationships too. And I think that's really important. Like solidarity is just having a relationship with people and people and communities that can trust and rely on each other. But it doesn't have to be exactly the same. You don't have to be facing the exact same issue, but if we think of it as and I think that's what it is like thinking of what we're coming in solidarity for as the systems that are affecting all of us. They affect us in different ways, but they're tied to the same system. And then we can still hold on to our individual uniqueness, and that doesn't have to be meshed together for it to be solidarity. And I always think of the quote by Arundhati Roy where she says, I think, no, it's not Arundhati Roy, I'm sorry, that's a different quote, but there's this quote that says, it's we want to create a world where many worlds can fit. And like that, we can have a world where each uniqueness and culture and heritage is there, but it's a world that's comfortable for each one to flourish and to be and to exist without any of these larger systems of oppression. And that's kind of how I view solidarity.
And we have to realize that there is more than just one type of injustice. There's racial injustice, there's economic injustice, there's social injustice. And the more we can connect with other types of injustices, I think we're in a better position to be in better solidarity with them.
Absolutely agree. Thank you both for that. There is a question in the chat that I want to pose to everybody here, which is how can we get around the conservative voices in our community who don't value working with, how can we go around conservative voices in our community who don't value working with other communities or who don't value the arts? It's a great question. I think the first answer is creating spaces like ours. I think, there is some merit in our space being a non-political, non-religious space where you're kind of welcoming the different voices. And second, and this is what's more really ironic, is more conservative voices. I think if you kind of go back to this idea that I brought up earlier and that we were the strongest when we were working with other communities, when we were valuing the arts. And actually, I think it's a form of oppression where we started villainizing or otherizing other communities and otherizing the arts. And that's actually what led to our downfall in many ways as a community. I think, going back to historical facts, like let's say if we're even going to go back to the Ottoman Empire, like why was the Ottoman Empire at the time leading the world? And it was because they were leading in the arts. They were leading in terms of their, relations with other communities. And it's going back to that and beyond, obviously beyond the Ottoman Empire and thinking about that. So that's personally how I've dealt with it. I want to hear how everyone else, or does anyone else have any thoughts? And I'll put the question in the chat, private message too. Can you give, anyone else want to weigh in?
I think education is the answer.
Yes.
That's my answer to this question. We have to really educate one another, and in a very constructive manner. There are those who don't see value in art, but I don't think it's because they don't see my perspective. It's just when they begin Palestinian art, let me be specific, is a form, has a form of expression. And if I can tie that art to freedom, if I can tie this art to the struggle, if I can tie this art to culture, I think I have a better chance of educating others about the value of the art.
Absolutely. I think education is always the answer. And I think challenging, the narratives that you may or may not have grown up with, and really trying to educate yourself to go beyond that. So to wrap us up, because I am conscious of the time, I want to discuss the last point, which is Palestinians are more than victims. And I think that was a ever-present theme throughout the conference and every session that we were doing, is, from Dr. Shireen in the beginning, showing the different artifacts, which again, in today's world will be challenged, like, do these artifacts even exist? And like she was saying, are basically worthless, to Dr. Baroud kind of celebrating and elevating the Palestinian voices, to Christian Davis Bailey and Wafa Aghnam really showing what Palestinians can come up with in response to resistance, and the beautiful thobe and the culture that we passed down from generation to generation, this concept of intergenerational trauma and understanding and really unpacking it. Palestinians are more than victims. And I actually shared this specific story in one of our Homeland Project's trips. At the time, we actually met up with Mahid Tamimi. And I remember she was, we were talking, and one of the main points that she brought up is one of the biggest disservices to the Palestinian struggle is painting the Palestinian as a victim. Because she goes, then yes, okay, you may be getting quote unquote more solidarity, but you're taking away the reality that these people are in the position that they're in for one reason and one reason only, because of the occupation. If you remove the occupation, then you have a flourishing, thriving community, not an impoverished community that needs the Western world or the privileged world's help. And I think that's really the idea of centering the conversation back to this idea of occupation, and not centering it as like a human rights struggle, or like, oh, we have a bunch of victims that we need to help, and really thinking about how to elevate that. So I want to pose that question to all of you. How can we do that? How have you seen this narrative or conversation of Palestinians are more than just victims? And how do you think that this will aid us into seeing a freedom for all, not only Palestinians? I was taught once the awkward silences are the best way to get people to talk. So, anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one thing we've been doing at PAC is celebrating all the successes in our community, and we never we pride ourselves for being Palestinians. We pride ourselves for any success that the community does. And we notice that every time we do that, the community loves it. The community rallies around it. We Palestinians, we look for success. We look to show the whole world that we are the most highly educated people, that we are very successful in everything we do. We bring up the success that we do in our area in Patterson, or whenever we have college student graduates, whenever we have anybody who's becoming the first of anything. So I think that's very, very important to focus on that, instead of showing the weak parts of it. But the argument of being a victim, the Palestinians are definitely a victim of occupation, and the occupation is putting a lot of limitations on what the Palestinians can and cannot do inside of Palestine. And even sometimes what we can and cannot do, they try to do this even here in the United States by trying to silence all the Palestinian voices. But I think that we should acknowledge that those things exist, but not become the victim of them and prevent them from doing what we want to do. And I think that, like when we were talking, like why not a lot of Palestinians are involved in colleges, I think there's still some of that mentality of, if I do this, something happened to me, and I don't want to jeopardize my future. So I want to play it safe. So I think if we adopt the victim mentality, it's destructive. But if we point the occupation and everything they doing to the Palestinian, but then bring up the bright and brilliant and resilient part of the Palestinians and celebrate it all the time, I think that's the way we should go.
But you know, we also love life. I mean, we really, when you think about the amount of dispossession that we went through since and before the creation of Israel, you can see that the history of the Palestinian people is a proud history. We are really honest in our search for a meaningful way to live life. And freedom is lacking. And if we just think about the amount of energy, the amount of sacrifice, the amount of efforts that the Palestinian people went through fighting, for example, Zionism and the Zionist movement, which has been supported by the superpowers, you know, starting with the British and the Americans and the Europeans and so on. Just think about the amount of effort and force that we are facing. I mean, just a population. Just let's talk about the Palestinians who are living in Palestine today, totaling 6.5 million people, 7 million people, and these have it on their shoulder to resist and fight the most fascist occupation, modern occupation known to mankind. And the reason is because we cherish freedom. We want freedom, and we're willing to sacrifice for that freedom in many ways. We are citizens, we're not victims. And honest and good citizens look for their dignity through freedom. And I think that the Palestinians have always cherished life. And yes, we have been victimized by oppression, by occupation, by dispossession. But in the end, it is our dignity, it is our narrative, it is our cause that is just. If you want to look at the Palestinian issue, it is the definition of justice. If you want to define justice, Palestine is justice. So it's unfortunately, you know, we have been, you know, our struggle has been, I think, not only misunderstood, but our fight against injustice was seen through the lenses that were defined by others, not by the Palestinian people. It's the West. It's the Zionist movement. It is the supporters of settler colonialism that have really created lenses, and through the media and through the you know, the misrepresentation of history, they were kind of able to combat the Palestinian narrative, but to no avail. They have not succeeded.
Yeah, I think you summarized all the points very well.
What is it? It's just random, but I don't think
So so I think that summarizes all the points very well, and I think that's the idea that we are a powerful people, and people who stand with the Palestinian people are a powerful people. And I think some of the biggest disservice that has been done to us is the complete victimizing of it, because the way that we have been humanized is only as victims. Even if you want to see in the last escalations and killings that happened in Gaza, we were only finally seen, not when Al-Aqsa was attacked, not when everything's happened, when Gaza was being bombed and people were dying. And it's like, did it have to take to that point for for the world to see us as people? And even then, people were still debating that we're people. So I think in many ways, the victimizing of us is what's been like the biggest kind of hijacking of our cause, if it makes sense. And when we take more ownership of our cause and we say, you know what, we don't need our people to die in order for us to recognize that we're a people. We need you to start off from the beginning to recognize that we are human beings as anyone else is, and we have the right to self-determination and freedom and the pursuit of liberty than anyone else is. And I think that's really the idea, because once we get into that mindset, we're able to think of the long term, we're able to think of the big picture, we're able to think of creating organizations and creating art and creating all these different things of flourishing our community and keeping it growing. But if we're waiting until people see all the many various human rights violations and the murders and the killings that are happening, if that's what we're waiting for, then we're never going to get there. But if we're like empowering ourselves and we're realizing that we're more than victims from the beginning, and working to empower us from within, I think that's when we're going to be able to see.
Yeah, if I might add, I think at this point that one of the biggest problems we have is that the Israelis always like to put themselves as the victims and portray the Palestinians as the aggressors. And this is why they drag us into that game, that now we are victims of occupation, but we will never agree to live with a victim mentality and be defeated by it. So this is why where this topic is a little bit, it's not like a black and white. We definitely are victims of the Israeli occupation, and it puts a lot of limit on what we do. And they are not the victims of the Palestinian aggression or the Palestinian terrorism like they always like to portray. But that being said, we will never agree as Palestinians to live with a victim mentality and let them do whatever they want to do to us. No, we are very proud people, very resilient people, very successful people. And like Ammar used to say, Shab al-Jabbari.
Absolutely, and that's where the idea is that obviously there are victims of occupation, but we're more than just victims. So it's kind of challenging ourselves internally as a community to go beyond that. So with that, I want to thank you all for having and discoursing. This was a really rewarding part for me to kind of bring everything together, and I hope that we all walked away with like some concrete ideas to start thinking about as a community of how we can take everything that we've learned these last 4 days and implement it into action. And that's always something that we're really about. Unpack. We don't just talk the talk, we try to walk the walk. And so this is really the point of this conversation, was to start giving us these ideas to try to see, okay, what are actionable things that we can take out of this conversation? So with that, I'd first like to thank one of our sponsors, Sharia Wiz, who is constantly supporting PAC. Sharia Wiz estate plan is legally valid, state-specific, and custom-tailored by you. Sharia Wiz uses bank-level encryption to keep your information safe and secure. They're backed and supported by many different organizations. We highly recommend you to check out the information there. And if you are planning to write your will, go through Sharia Wiz. They have the best way to help you with that. And lastly, before we formally end, first off, I want to give a huge shout out to Abir Sabagh, our Community Outreach and Palestine Education Director, who has literally poured her life into this conference to make it happen the last couple of weeks, since I want to say November, if not even before. This has been something that we've been talking about, and every week, then it became every day. She was working tirelessly in and out to ensure that this conference was a success. This was her brainchild from the beginning. She was like, I have this idea and let's see this. And there were a lot of ups and downs trying to confirm all of our speakers. And so I just really want all of us collectively to unmute and give Abir a round of applause for all her hard work and dedication and to make all of this happen. So thank you, Abir. Feel free to unmute and actually applause, or you can do like reactionary applauses.
Thank you, Rania, for going through the whole thing with me and all your guidance. And I'm with you too, and Yali and everyone at PAC, and Fadia. Fadia's on for all your work.
So the other shout outs are thank you very much to Yali, who's been in the background handling all the tech moderation. She's the one who's been putting things throughout the chat. She's also the one who worked really hard to market the conference. So all our social media posts were made and constantly done by Liali. So we really appreciate all her efforts to make sure the conference is a success up until this point and throughout the conference itself. So thank you, Layali. Let's give them all a round of applause.
Thank you, Layali.
And then lastly, I also want to thank Fadia, who is on the call. Like Abir said, Fadia is our graphic designing queen. That's her new title. She has worked, I don't even want to tell you how hard we put her to work these last 2 weeks. Between PAC Day and the PAC conference, she's literally been working around the clock, producing beautiful images, producing shirts like this, which we highly recommend you all to check out our PAC store. All of those designs were made by Fadia, except our first shirt, which is made for another intern. But Fadia is phenomenal. Our booklet, our monthly newsletters, our Palestine magazine. She is our graphic designing queen, and hats off to you, Fadia. Thank you very much for everything that you have done and continue to do for PAC. And I want to thank all of our moderators throughout this conference. It's a very purposeful choice for our team to kind of highlight the different members of our community. And we are very happy and pleased with the beautiful community members who came out to moderate these sessions. So we thank the moderators that we had throughout, and we hope to continue to see their involvement in many different ways. And I want to thank our other staff members and our other team who's also helped in many different ways. And just to give you all an example of the many things that are happening at PAC, while Abir, Layali, and myself have been on throughout the conference, actually right now, the other part of our team, Fida, Reem, Qasim, and Fadia was also there, and Layla, we're actually in the process of giving out Ramadan baskets for Ramadan. So giving about 200 community families in our community that are in need. So I want to just really shout out our beautiful team for doing that. And lastly, we just want to hear from all of you. So please, 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 we have a survey in the chat. Please take the time to fill it out. It's very important for us that you fill this out. We will be sending it with a follow-up email after the conference. And with that, I will pass on the mic to Abir to officially close us off for our 3rd annual conference.
I have nothing more to add. I just want to give a shout out to Rania too for heading everything that we all do also. And we really appreciate you. We appreciate all of you staying on, especially those of you who are here for all 4 days. And hopefully we'll do this again next year. And I think we already figured out our theme. So please stay in contact with PAC for other events if you really appreciate this. And thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you. And please add me to your list, your email list, whatever list you have. I really enjoyed the last few hours tremendously. I can see the bright energy, among those who spoke. It's very encouraging. It's very comforting, and I think freedom is coming.
Yes.
Yes. And yeah, so we can add you.
Yes, sorry, just last thing, I forgot to shout out our board of directors who tirelessly support and work with everything we do. Mustafa is our board president who literally puts all his life and work and efforts into making sure PAC is a success. And I do not think it would be a success without him. So thank you very much for everything that you do. And he was here every single session throughout the last 4 days. So thank you for that. And the chat to subscribe is, the link to subscribe is in the chat. Sorry, that was the last thing I wanted to add.
Thank you. I'll do it right now.